Good morning. It's great to be here and great to see all of you. And I am thrilled to present the 2024 State of the Line for Workers' Compensation. However, before diving into the numbers, I feel like I need to address some of the pressing issues that we have been emerging in the early months of 2025. They're raising some concerns for all of us in this room, especially for the workers' compensation line of business. So first off, economic uncertainty is looming pretty large, with increased likelihood of the R, recession. We must consider the layered impacts of all of the different policies, tariff policy, immigration policy, and the government efficiency actions, and how will all of these interplay and develop the economic landscape for the months and the years to come? And is there a significant shift potentially on the horizon for workers' compensation? And if you're writing business in California, you're probably thinking change is coming. Indeed, the California Bureau has filed the first double-digit increase in loss costs in quite some time. And while California's story is unique, it's not mine to tell. I can tell you that every state has a story. And I'll sprinkle in a few California contrasts in today's discussion. So despite the uncertainties and the potential headwinds that for workers' compensation in 2025, we are well positioned with the 2024 results to weather a storm that might be on the horizon. So let's start with the highlights. Premium for workers' compensation is moderately down, despite strong payroll growth. Calendar year and accident year combined ratios are under 100, again, showing us continued profitability. Frequency continues to decline. Loss costs continue to decline, reflecting the favorable loss experience. And workers' comp reserves remain redundant. However, the average lost time claim is rising by 6% year over year. And while the indemnity rise is generally aligned with wages, the rise in medical loss cost per lost time claim is a bit of a surprise and a bit of a concern. We're going to modify our typical sequence where we start with the high-level numbers and then dive into the details. This year, I'm going to set the stage with the overall property and casualty results and then dive into the loss drivers to hit that medical information sooner rather than later. And then we'll follow on with the premium and overall results, which are generally similar to last year. So the saying goes, the devil is in the details, and I like to think that the insights are in the details. And I have many of them to share, so let's get going. So starting with a broad look at the property and casualty industry, first things first, total property and casualty net written premium has grown 8.8% in 2024 to just over $927 billion. This is for private carriers, and on a direct basis, did you know that property and casualty is reported to have passed the $1 trillion mark? That is quite a milestone for our industry. So all lines of business that you see here see increases in net written premium during 2024. And most notable amongst these increases is the personal lines, personal auto, as well as homeowners. In fact, you see here that together those two lines make up more than 50% of property and casualty. Each of those lines are growing at more than 12% per year. In contrast, commercial lines grew 4.3% year over year, and commercial auto continues its path of rate increases, yielding 10% of net written premium growth. And other liability, you see here, the growth has slowed down a bit this year. As for workers' compensation, net written premium declined 3.2%, the only line on this slide that shows a decline year over year. So we're going to set that stage with a historical perspective of property and casualty net written premium. And so first off, note the flatness of the P&C industry from 2004 to 2011. And from 2012 to 2017, you see a growth rate of 4%. And since 2018, you see that average annual growth rate has grown to 7%, accelerating post-pandemic. What's contributing to these recent changes is the property cat challenges, the inflationary pressures on cost of repairs, as well as continued impacts of social inflation, just to name a few. Let's take a brief look at commercial lines net written premium over this same time period. It's another good historical perspective. And this time, note the flatness of the commercial lines net written premium from 2004 all the way to 2017, with a growth rate of 1.1%. And since then, you see a growth rate of 8.4%. And in contrast, over that same recent time period, 18 to 24, the growth rate for workers' compensation was a small fractional decrease. So here we're going to highlight the workers' compensation share of commercial lines premium and how that's changed over time. And you see in 2004, it was 17% of commercial lines premium. And in 2024, it's 10% of commercial lines premium. So a key aspect that sets workers' compensation apart over this time period is the declining claim frequency. Workers are safer now than they've ever been before. And the relative premium share reflects that for workers' compensation. So the other commercial lines are clearly addressing some profitability challenges. So let's go into profitability next. So here we see a long-term view of property and casualty combined ratios. And you see for 2024, the net result is a 97 combined ratio for the calendar year. And over time, you see that these results have oscillated around the break-even point of 100. And in the last decade, we see 6 out of 10 years of underwriting profit. And if you're wondering, commercial lines combined ratios are actually quite similar for 2024. There's a 97 as well. And over history, commercial lines is typically the same or better than the overall property and casualty. So let's take a look at the line detail. And here you see significant year-over-year improvement in the property calendar year combined ratios, despite the cat activity in both of these years. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about some of that cat activity. We saw 27 catastrophic events with more than $1 billion in damages in 2024. It's not quite as bad as what 2023 brought, because we saw 28 events with more than $1 billion in insured damages. Hurricane Helene stands out as the costliest event in 2024, with nearly $80 billion in damages. And that Category 4 storm, some of us remember pretty well, made landfall in Florida and left a path of inland destruction into North Carolina, Tennessee, and so on. But given that cat activity and the improvement you see here in the calendar year combined ratios, it suggests that carriers are getting more premium for the exposure. And I share this as a reference point for 2025 because we've already seen many events with damages of $1 billion or more, including the costliest single event in history, the California wildfires. A miserable way to start the year with respect to catastrophes. Continued profitability challenges, we see them in the casualty lines of commercial auto and other liability as their calendar year combined ratios are over 100. But as for workers' compensation, we see a calendar year of 86, very consistent with what we saw last year. So property and casualty grew a lot by 8.8%, and the results are profitable for 2024. And workers' compensation profitability is stable, despite the the moderate decline in premium. Next, we'll dive into the loss drivers, and I mentioned the headlines, declining frequency and rising severity. So let's take a look. And we're starting this section with a look at the total lost time claim severity. And this includes indemnity and medical, and the average lost time claim for accident year 2024 will be about 6% higher than accident year 2023. We haven't seen a year-over-year increase of that magnitude since the mid-2000s. So let's put a spotlight on the 6%. So starting with a look at indemnity claim severity for the lost time claims, first, we see here that indemnity is also rising at 6%. I guess that's going to be a key number that we remember. And we're going to compare this increase to the increase in wages that has occurred, as indemnity benefits are a function of wages earned by the injured workers. So first you see here in blue the cumulative change in the lost time claim severity for indemnity, and in orange you see the change in wages over time. And both of these are indexed back to 2004, and they tracked pretty closely before 2013. And since 2013, you see that wages have drastically outpaced the increases in claim severity over this time period. But I'm going to draw your attention to the more recent time periods, post-pandemic, where we know that wages have grown substantially. Since 2020, you can see that the growth in indemnity severity and the growth in wages are basically the same, as you can see that those two lines are parallel. And as we transition to medical, I'll start with the fact that the share of medical has remained quite constant over time, a smidge over 50% overall. But let's look at how medical changes, the share of medical changes with the as the change in the claim size increases. As the size of claim increases from left to right across this slide, the proportion of medical costs rises. So for claims greater than $5 million, you see 90% of the total loss is medical. That's really not a surprise to most of us in this room. So large losses tend to get a lot of attention, and we're often asked about what we're seeing. And are we seeing more mega claims? And with medical technology advancements, and we're asked if survival rates are impacting the overall claim costs. And does that put pressure on the size of claims? We're also asked if social inflation is having any impact on the largest claims. All of these questions led to the 2024 collaboration with the bureaus, since no one bureau has sufficient data volume to really demonstrate any patterns. So let's take a peek into that analysis.
When it comes to mega claims, no single bureau can tell the full story. That's why, in 2020, NCCI and 9 other bureaus came together to provide the first ever countrywide view and analysis of large claims. Now, through continued collaboration, we've expanded that research, offering fresh insights into mega claims trends shaping the workers' compensation industry. Mega claims make up 1 of every 1,300 lost time claims. This means that a single state can have less than a handful of claims that exceed $2 million in any given accident year. Picture a major construction accident in one state, a catastrophe causing severe burns in another, or a trucking accident resulting in multiple injuries elsewhere. Individually, these cases might seem like outliers, but when we combine data from across the country, patterns start to emerge. Trends that weren't visible before suddenly become clear. By combining data across jurisdictions, we can identify patterns that no single bureau could see alone. This joint effort allows us to better understand these high-cost claims and how they're changing over time. So what did we find? While overall workers' compensation claim frequency continues to decline, the number of claims exceeding $2 million has steadily risen. Following a decline during the most recent recession, mega claim frequency has trended upwards, though at a moderate pace and still below pre-recession levels. This trend in frequency is seen across all industries, but is largest within construction. Adding complexity to the frequency increase is a notable change in how mega claims are emerging over time. More claims are being recognized earlier, with fewer developing into mega claims at later reports. Since 2017, reported losses exceeding $2 million at 18 months post-policy inception have increased as a share of ultimate, reinforcing this shift in emergence. This pattern is seen across all thresholds of mega claims, from $2 million to $10 million. This raises an important question. Are these claims truly occurring more frequently, or are they just being identified earlier in the claims process? While that question is difficult to answer, what we can observe is the type of claims that are most likely to develop into a mega claim and exceed the largest threshold of $10 million. In other words, which characteristics are we noticing and intend to keep an eye on? Construction-related injuries, motor vehicle accidents, and head trauma continue to represent a larger share of high-cost claims, each accounting for over 30% of claims exceeding $10 million in their respective categories. In addition, injuries due to burns and electric shocks make up a smaller share compared to motor vehicle, but are the quickest to be recognized as mega claims. These findings highlight the evolving nature of how the industry is identifying mega claims, and they encourage future collaborations to continue tracking and monitoring these severe injuries in workers' compensation. For the updated report, the analysis was broadened, expanding beyond claim count metrics to include loss and premium data, providing a more comprehensive view. 4 additional policy years were analyzed, and we introduced new claim thresholds, including $0 and $2 million, to better differentiate mega claims from non-mega claims. We hope to continue building and expanding on this research in the future as stakeholders have made it clear how much they value these insights. This study is just one example of how data sharing across jurisdictions benefits the entire industry. Through continued collaboration, we can uncover the insights needed to navigate the transforming workers' compensation landscape.
So first, a shout out to our Bureau partners for collaborating on this study. We cannot do this alone, and we tried to represent some of the team members here with their characters in the video, and hopefully some of you out here are recognizing yourselves. So in response to some of the questions, yes, we are seeing an increase in the number of claims in excess of $2 million. And as the video described, though, it could be impacted by the use of predictive analytics for early recognition of challenging claims. There's very little change in the occurrence of the $5 million and $10 million thresholds, and you see that here in the red and the blue lines. For these largest claims, it seems to be rather steady over this entire decade. The video mentioned 1 in every 1,300 claims reaches $2 million. Fortunately, only 1 in nearly 29,000 claims pierces the $10 million threshold. So, as we transition to the overall average medical severity, it's both a surprise and a concern. And you see here that 6% again, and year over year, medical is rising as well. We have not seen a change of this magnitude since the mid-2000s. And it's explainable with details, so hang in there, but I can tell you it's not due to large loss activity. The medical data call gives us an early look to changes in medical paid per claim year over year. And I'll tell you that this is an incomplete look at the accident year 2024. It represents everything that's reported to date on the medical data call, and it's comparable to a similar time period in 2023. So it's preliminary for the accident year 24, but it's very directional. So if we start on the right, we see that the overall paid per claim appears to be rising 7%. So compared to the 6% we've been talking about, this number is inclusive of more data in this data set, including large deductible policies and medical-only claims. So costs are increasing for every medical category you see here. There's a low of 3% for inpatient and a high of 8.1% for drugs, with almost all of the remaining categories increasing around 6%. So what's also important is the weights that apply to the different cost categories, and I've highlighted here that physicians makes up 43% of a typical accident year's medical costs. And that means that the physician's component actually contributes about 2.5 points to the overall 6%. So this view shows you that no one cost category is driving the higher than expected medical increase. But in order to fully appreciate what's underneath the 2024 year-over-year change, we need to consider both price and utilization. Let's talk about price first. So last year we focused some time on the state of the line, talking about the efficacy of the medical fee schedules and how they're across the industry and the expansion of such to more cost categories. Think inpatient, outpatient, drug formularies. Generally, they are working very well to manage the costs overall, and they're regularly updated. In 2024, we introduced the Work Comp Weighted Medical Index to closely watch the increases in prices of medical components. So what does that tell us? The index is shown here, and it's a monthly view that we publish on NCCI.com, and we publish that quarterly. Each medical cost category has its own price pressures, and you see that here with the gray lines. And once you weight them all together, you see in purple our weighted impact. But no one number tells the story, so we try to simplify it with a weighted average. And since 2022, you can see here that the increases in prices of medical expenses has generally been well controlled over time and is up between 2.5% to 3.5%. Very moderate price impacts continue. If we look at the largest category of medical spend, that's physicians, we see that it too is very moderate and well controlled by medical fee schedules. And you see that here, it's been very low over the past couple of years, rising to 2.5% in late 2024. And if prices are generally moderate, then it must be something else that's driving the 6% that we're seeing. That's where utilization comes in. Utilization is a broad term that we use to capture the types of medical services that are used to treat an injured worker, who is providing them, and how much, or the quantity of services that are provided. And if you've been watching our research over the years, we have invested a lot of time and energy understanding these components of changes in costs by decomposing them into prices and utilization. So we're going to leverage that research right now. So here you see the overall paid per claim rising at 7%, and our research attributes 4% of the increase to utilization year over year, and the moderate 3% to price. So on the left, you see that 4% split out into components of utilization. And so I'm going to translate what this means. It means that we see meaningful increases in physical medicine. So think about physical therapy visits. We're seeing more of them per claim. And evaluation and management, more office visits per claim. Alongside that, we see increases in minor and major surgery, which actually suggests that there's a change in treatment patterns that might be occurring underneath. But we hypothesize The 6% year over year for all medical is likely driven by changes in utilization, as the price component continues to be very moderate. So we're going to be sharing much more throughout 2025 as we operationalize our decomposition capability, in addition to watching those inflationary pressures on medical costs. But I think I've made the point that no one number tells the story and tells this medical story, but perhaps I'm going to give you some advice, is that headlines can be misleading, and we plan to watch this closely. We will also use this year to validate our research and to validate the utilization metrics for the other medical expense categories. So expect to see more of that in the future. As we transition to frequency, this year I'm starting with a different view. And this metric is reported in the annual statistical bulletin. It compares claim activity per 100,000 workers. And you see that here for NCCI states in orange, and you see a long-term decline. This is a way we can benchmark against other bureaus and provide a more fulsome view of the workers' compensation frequency. So keep in mind that this is reported in the annual statistical bulletin through 2022, but the historical context here is important for the story I want to share. So each line of gray here represents the other workers' comp rating bureaus, as they too are reported in the annual statistical bulletin. And you see a similar rate of decline, except that top line, where one of these things is not quite like the other. The top line is California, very different. So we observe the initial decline from 2004 to 2009 appears to be quite faster decline in frequency than the rest of the bureaus have experienced. That's due to the significant California reforms that took place during that time period. There are several state differences that contributes to differences in frequency. And a few of those examples are the compensability of workers' comp claims. And that's driven by different regulations in different states. We also see industry mix could be different, as well as injury type could be different. And we all know that cumulative trauma claims are rather unique to California and is an ongoing challenge for those of you writing business there. So looking more closely at this comparison, since 2009, it's an interesting perspective. So California has remained flat, even increasing in recent years, and this is a contributing factor into their recent filing. It's very different from the other bureaus, including NCCI, which have continued to experience long-term declines in frequency. So I hope this demonstrates to you that every state does have a story, but it also suggests that what happens in California could stay in California. It's not expected to happen in other jurisdictions. Let's come back to NCCI's jurisdictions and share the latest data point for frequency. And we estimate that accident year 2024 has seen another decline in frequency of 5%. So frequency continues to decline, and we saw these unadjusted views of total severity and explained the year-over-year differences. So let's put it all together. And in order to do that, I have to adjust these severity figures for wage increases that have happened over this time period. And here you see that in the orange bars, that adjusts the historical severity to current wages. On an adjusted basis, what you see here is that lost time severity is showing a small year-over-year increase. In fact, you see it declining from 2009 all the way to 2021 and flattening out to some degree since then. So put this small increase in adjusted severity and the decline in frequency together, what do we get? So I'm going to bring you back to a simple math equation. Multiplying frequency times severity, we get a loss ratio, or losses divided by premium. Let's look at that over time for NCCI's jurisdictions. So this view compares loss to premium, and it looks at the change year over year. And when you look across 20 years, the average is a decline of 4.5%. And you only see two small increases in two instances of a small increase. The year-over-year change in loss ratio for 2024 is also a decline, despite rising severity. It's a bit smaller than what we've seen across these 20 years. But it suggests that overall, when you put it all together, favorable loss experience continues, driven by the continued decline in frequency. So we talked about indemnity severity and the 6% number they're going to remember. And we also talked about the 6% number for medical you're going to remember. I think it's easy to remember 6. It's changes in utilization, though, that are driving more of the pain in medical so far. And frequency continues its long-term decline. So next is premium, and let's take a look at the moderate decline that I mentioned in the beginning. So first we see a historical view of workers' compensation net written premium for the most recent 21 years here. Private carrier premium is shown in blue, and the state fund premium is shown in orange. So together, we see that the total net written premium for 2024 is $46.3 billion, a moderate 3.2% decline from 2023. But it's notable that when you look at on the left, 2004, and 2024 on the right, the total premium is basically the same. Naturally rising payroll, annual adjustments to loss costs, coupled with a long-term decline in frequency, are the predominant reasons why workers' compensation premium does not grow sequentially like other lines of business. These dynamics set us apart from other lines. So let's quickly detour on the premium journey to take a peek at the residual market. And we see that the premium in the NCCI pooled service pools, they've been declining since 2014. And policy year 2024 continues to shrink and is now $655 million. From a market share perspective, you can also see it shrinking over time into its current 5% market share, a very manageable size, as Tracy mentioned noted in her remarks. It's a very unique viewpoint of the industry. A 5% market share suggests that the most difficult risks are finding coverage in the voluntary market. Indicator of a healthy workers' compensation system. So let's come back to the voluntary market dynamics. Now we're going to switch to direct written premium because this allows us to take a look at state level detail. So overall, direct written premium has also decreased by 1.3% year over year. So let's look at the state detail. And you see that most states are showing declines in direct written premium, and you see that in shades of blue. You see a few shades of orange that represent the positive direct written premium changes. And the deepest decline you see is in Florida. And there's some notable increases in Colorado and Vermont. So workers' compensation premium is a function of payroll and rate on payroll. So let's look at payroll next. So year over year, payroll has increased 5.4%. It's the fourth consecutive year of payroll growth in the system of more than 5%. And on the right, you see that 2024's growth in payroll is mostly from wages. And you see wage growth is high year over year in nearly all sectors. On the left, you see that employment growth has contributed about 1% to this year's payroll growth. But all in all, this is indicative of a solid labor market. So let's look at rate on payroll next. So the largest part of rate on payroll are the loss costs, and we start with a look at the loss costs that are effective in 2024. And we see the decline reported last year of 9.2%. So I'm leaving 2025 out for just a moment to focus on the predominant driver of the year-over-year change, 24 over 23. And the remaining parts of rate on payroll are the carrier pricing components, including schedule rating, dividends, and rate and loss cost departures. And here you see that the year-over-year change in the combined impact of those items is 1%. And it's driven mostly by an increase in the rate and loss cost departures. So when we bring these components all together, we're looking at a year-over-year change in direct written premium for 23 to 24. And this is for NCCI states, I'll remind you. But what we see here is that the change in payroll and the change in loss costs and mix, for the most part, offset each other. The change in the combined impact of the carrier pricing components is actually increasing 1.8% this year. So the overall 2024 premium is explained year over year. Now let's talk about 2025, what we know and what we don't know. We know what we filed in 2025, and this shows you that we filed an average loss cost decrease of 6%. And since every state has a story, you see that most NCCI states have decreases effective in 2025, ranging from -13 to a +6.5. The positive number you see here is quite unique. It's also reflective of a state that has significantly low payroll caps. That's contributing to the need to increase loss costs. And in this year, only 3 of NCCI's 38 jurisdictions have double-digit decreases in 2025. But if this view included other bureaus, you would see mostly declines. And you'd see at both ends some interesting things. On the left, New York would stand out, as the New York Bureau has recently announced its intention to file a -13 effective 10/1/2025. And on the right, California would stand out with its recently filed +11 effective 9/1/2025. I want you to all say it with me. Every state has a story. But now you see, so for 2025, we know what's happening with loss costs, and they're declining 6%. What can we expect for payroll? Let's look at a historical perspective on payroll to see how it's grown over time. And what's notable here is over 20 years, the long-term average is 4.2%. And only one of those years shows a material decline in payroll year over year. That's 2009. Let's look at the employment and wage components of historical payroll. Now you see more orange than blue, which means that over time, the orange is representative of growth in wages, and we have continuous increases in wages over time. What's also notable is that the employment growth has also contributed in most years. But you do see a few years where employment was constrained, in fact, negative year over year. The average employment gain, though, over the entire 20-year period is just under 1% per year. And the average wage growth over these years is 3.3%. Again, no real surprise on that number, as I think that's what most of us would expect. So now we're layering in the gray highlight depicting the last 3 recessions. And there's only one instance here where the wages actually decreased on top of an employment decline, and that was 2009. But this visual does show you that in most years, payroll growth is positive and fuels the workers' compensation system. The latest 4 payroll points in white are higher than what we've seen higher than average since the pandemic. From the peak in 2021, you can see that payroll changes have started to taper downward. So far in 2025, we have issued 5 monthly labor market insights reports, and they're all telling us that the labor market hasn't shown any signs of stress so far. Employment is positive, and wages remain around 4%. So it's the possibility of recession on the horizon that could be disruptive to the payroll growth picture here, and time will tell how 2025 fares. Let's take a look at what payroll and loss costs have done between a time period of 2015 and 2024. And you can see here, too, that the net written premium number for these 2 years is very similar. So you see changes in payroll in blue and changes in loss costs in orange, and they tend to offset to some degree year over year, with positive payroll and negative loss costs. When we index this to 2015, you see that the change in payroll has grown 55% over this time period, and loss costs have decreased 45% over this time period. And if you were here last year, my colleague Nadej Bernard and I spent some time on this topic. And one of the takeaways from that session was that in healthy times, loss cost reductions could be considered a natural state for workers' compensation when payroll growth outpaces loss cost trends. So the expectation is that loss costs could continue to be adjusted downward as payroll continues its natural climb. Given the recent rise in severity, we may expect that these changes, though, might be more moderate. So ongoing payroll growth, coupled with the cumulative reduction in loss costs, where people say, how low can they go? Over this prolonged period of time, it's reached a level where achieving small, precise percentage changes has become a more and more difficult mathematical challenge. So to address this, NCCI is introducing a very important change in this year's filing season. It's called the Decimal Extension Initiative. So let's take a closer look at what this means and how it will impact the industry.
Over the past few decades, wage inflation and employment growth have caused payroll to increase significantly. At the same time, safer workplaces, robotics, advanced machinery, and automation have made workplaces safer, translating to workers' compensation claims and their associated costs not keeping pace with these payroll increases. The result, a steady, long-term decline in workers' compensation loss costs relative to payroll. Lower workers' comp costs compared to wages is great news for the industry as a whole. The downstream impact is that loss costs for some classification codes have dropped to unprecedented levels and are so low that it becomes difficult to make precise changes year to year. Imagine a class code with a loss cost of 4 cents. If the smallest change that can be made is by a full cent, that means any adjustment is at least a 25% change. There's no way to make smaller, more precise changes within the current system. These situations are becoming more frequent each year as payrolls continue to rise and loss costs continue to decline. Office workers are the most impacted. More than 33% of classifications within the office and clerical group have a loss cost of 10 cents or less. This includes classification code 8810, office employees, the largest class code by payroll volume. Some codes have even hit the 1 cent mark. At this level, loss costs can't go any lower under the current system. These numbers tell a powerful story. Numerous key class codes, which cover a large segment of businesses, are impacted, making it essential to address this problem immediately. How is NCCI tackling this issue? After a thorough internal and external assessment, it became clear that increasing the number of decimal places on loss costs to 3 was the optimal path forward. Most independent bureaus are joining NCCI in implementing this initiative, and communications with stakeholders are ongoing to support readiness for a smooth transition. By adding an extra decimal place, it's like breaking each penny into 10 smaller parts. Now, instead of being constrained with 1 cent adjustments, we can make changes as small as 1/10 of a cent, allowing for much more refined adjustments. NCCI is filing loss costs, rates, and expected loss rates extended to 3 decimal places for all classifications, starting with filings made next filing season in July 2025, with effective dates of January 1st, 2026 and subsequent. Unlocking the power of more precise changes opens up the possibility for creating additional class-related adjustments. Consider the previously mentioned Class Code 8810 and Class Code 8742, salespersons. Both are big classifications with low loss costs, but are they too big? It turns out that they are. These are commonly used office and clerical classifications that are used across various policies to reflect employee operations that are common across many businesses. In fact, these classifications are used so often that they appear on 1 out of every 2 policies written. The challenge is that NCCI studies have shown that these class codes are being used to not just classify employees, but also entire businesses. Analysis shows the underlying risk for these class codes differs when classifying a whole business versus just a portion of it. So, what's the solution? Splitting these codes up will recognize these differences. Splitting a classification is all about fairness. Imagine a group at a restaurant, and everyone orders different items. If one person ordered a side salad and another had a full meal, splitting the check evenly wouldn't be fair. Splitting these classification codes ensures that each business pays a loss cost that better reflects its specific risk and cost profile. Some might ask, why now? When you break down a class code at 4 cents, how different can the resulting loss cost be? Under a 2 decimal system, the answer is not much. However, with the addition of the 3rd decimal, we can refine these codes and recognize the difference in their loss experience. These initiatives aim to promote equity by accurately pricing each specific risk. By taking this step toward greater precision, we are also preparing for the future. These changes will result in a healthier and more resilient workers' compensation system.
So the key takeaways are loss cost rates and expected loss ratios will be extended to 3 decimal places, beginning with filings effective 1/1/26 and subsequent. So total premium will remain neutral overall, with individual classes equally likely to increase or decrease. And it allows for more precise classification changes. But what's remarkable is that the 2-digit system of loss cost rates and expected loss ratios has served the industry very well for more than 100 years. Do we think that this 1 decimal extension is going to last the next 100 years? Spoiler alert, I don't think so. But I think it should serve us well into the 2030s. So related to this, you also saw that we have work underway to revitalize some of the class system. And we've shared some of these insights with our industry committees and about the standard exception codes 8810 and 8742. There are differences in the loss costs between the basic and the standard exceptions. So we're taking a look to enhance the risk segmentation within these very large classes. So given that that could be disruptive, we're going to time that analysis and the introduction of those changes after the decimal extension is implemented. So to summarize the premium section, we saw that workers' compensation premium has been relatively consistent over the last decade, over 2 decades, with offsetting payroll and loss cost decreases. And the decimal extension initiative sets us up for the future loss cost actions, enabling both increases and decreases with more precision. So our last section of 2025 State of the Line is results. So let's get into the combined ratios, both calendar year and accident year. And given that significant reserve releases have occurred over the last decade, I'll show you our latest insights on the current reserve adequacy. And I'm going to remind you that this section is indicative of all workers' compensation as it comes from the NAIC data, and it's inclusive of countrywide experience. So first, no real news here on the calendar year combined ratio results. And we have another year of sub-90 calendar year combined ratio, 11 years in a row of underwriting profit, and 8 years of sub-90 combined ratios here. So by component, you see 8 years of sub-50 loss ratios on the bottom. You see a small 1% increase in loss adjustment expense with an offsetting decrease in underwriting expense and loss ratio. So next you see investment gain on insurance transactions, and our preliminary estimate of the 2024 investment gain is 10%, and it's quite in line with our long-term average that we see here of 11.4%. So a 10% investment gain combined with a 14% underwriting gain is a 24-point operating gain for 2024. That's easy to remember too, 24 and 24. 10th straight year of results, operating results, over 15%. And these results are calendar year. They're significantly impacted by the prior year reserve releases. In 2024, that was more than $5 billion again for the 7th straight year. So what's happening to the accident year combined ratios? So this is reported to NAIC. We aggregate it here for all private carriers, and you see that the accident year combined ratio for 2024 is 99. While we see an upward trend, we don't see any accident year in this whole decade over 100. But here again, I'm going to call out California, because the California Bureau reports that the accident year 2024 is a number well over 100. 123, I think, is their number. That's substantially over 100. But I'll also add that the California combined ratio has been over 100 for about 5 years now, 4 to 5 years. And year over year, they've increased by 10 points in the latest year. But if California is 20% of the workers' compensation market, that increase is roughly 2.5 points on this number, on the 99. So here in blue, we're adding in NCCI's estimates of accident year results, as we do our own analysis of the NAIC Schedule P data to independently project ultimate accident year combined ratios. What you see here is a similar upward climb over these 10 years, but not quite close to the 100 break-even mark. And I'll note that our analysis does include California. However, we do not do this analysis separately by state. But we do reflect some state differences in our tail loss development from 10 years to ultimate. And when you compare the orange and the blue here, you see that NCCI selections, they reflect that we expect more downward development to occur for each of these 10 accident years. If we focus on the last 5 accident years, each of these years, there's about 6 to 7 points of difference in our estimates. So that number actually equates to about $2.5 billion of difference in each of those years. So we're going to spend some time here to better understand how accident years have developed over time. if we focus on the last 5 accident years, if we focus on the loss and loss adjustment expense portion of the combined ratios, we start with initial look at the loss and loss adjustment expense ratio. And that's reported to NAIC for each of the last 10 years. What's notable here is that you don't really see a number that's really a lot different than 70. So it's about 70 for every year, and that's the initial loss ratio that's reported. So next we show the current accident year values, and the space between represents the totality of all of the prior year loss development that has occurred for each accident year. So for example, 2015 accident year was initially reported at 72 and has developed downward to 58, a 14-point improvement. Next, we're going to look at NCCI's analysis of accident year selections and show you that we too reevaluate our numbers each and every year. So here's the initial pick for each accident year, and it's well below 70, unlike the carrier reported. So next we're going to layer in our current estimates. And the point of this is to show you that we too change our selections over time. And here you see some of that movement. Our darker line here depicts our current latest selection. So for 2015 through 2020, you see that our picks have declined. So these decreases in these loss ratios on older accident years are largely due to decreases in the tail factors that we've seen over these years. But in 2021, you see that our initial pick is holding right where it is. And for 22 and 23, our selections have actually increased by 3 and 2 points respectively. These recent accident year numbers have increased due to recent changes that we've observed in the loss development patterns. The space between, so here we're going to start to build the perspective of the adequacy. So first, the latest reported by the carriers is shown in the orange, and again, NCCI is in blue. And again, we're going to see NCCI expects that downward development to happen. The space between our selections indicates a redundancy. So for accident year 2024, there are 6 loss ratio points of redundancy, and for accident year 2015, there are only 2 accident year loss ratio points of redundancy that remain. But since the space between reflects a redundancy for each of these accident years, we can add them up. And as we transition to the next slide, you can see that each accident year's contribution to the overall redundancy is depicted here with the more recent accident years shown bottom to top. And it's notable that more than half of this bar is redundancies from the most recent 5 accident years. So to translate these percentage points of redundancy into dollars, we then multiply each accident year by its premium, and we get a total dollar value for these 10 accident years. That's $21 billion redundancy. So think of that, though, as a gross result, because we adjust that for reserve discounts of $5 billion, and a net redundancy results, and that number is depicted here in blue, and is for year-end 2024 is $16 billion. Now we're putting that number into perspective with our past year's estimates of adequacies. So when you look at this view, any bar above 0 represents an inadequate position, and bars below 0 represent a redundancy. And you can see that we have been in a redundant position since year-end 2018. And you can also see that this is the first year that we're showing a slight reduction in the estimated workers' compensation redundancy. $16 billion is a big number. It represents about 14% of the carried workers' comp reserves for private carriers. And total reserves, if you're interested, are about $117 billion. So for 2024, we saw another year of profitable combined ratios, both calendar year and accident year, and a strong redundant reserve position. So I'd like to pause here and reflect on this view of the last decade. And you see on the left, calendar year results in green, NCCI's estimates in the middle in blue, and carrier reported in orange. We're not sure if this is going to continue, but this reflects a workers' compensation system that is healthy and has had an era of exceptional performance. And while there are headwinds on the horizon, the industry is well positioned to navigate through some challenges ahead. So what's on the horizon? What are we watching for? So we know that 2025 is off to a rocky start with some of the uncertainty in the broader economy. It's unsettling, to be fair. And I mentioned at the top of this hour that we're concerned about the economic impacts to workers' compensation from the interplay of a variety of actions, as any disruption to the economy can be disruptive to workers' compensation. So besides the economy, what else are we watching? We're watching for systemic changes to the healthcare system or something that threatens the efficacy of medical fee schedules or medical price pressure from utilization or prices. We're also watching for disruptive legislative actions that can have tangential impacts to workers' compensation, such as changes to Medicare and Medicaid. We're also always concerned with any potential shifts to that long-term decline in frequency. So far in 2025, there are no significant signs of stress. But what will the remainder of 2025 bring? NCCI remains vigilant, and you can count on us to help you navigate through 2025 as the year progresses. So let me recap today's state-of-the-line story. We see that workers' compensation is 10% of total commercial lines premium, and we posted one of the lowest calendar year combined ratios compared to any other line. We see that frequency continues to decline with the latest accident year's decline of 5%. And we see cost trends for workers' compensation are explainable year over year and over time. Medical rising 6% with moderate price impacts and increasing utilization. And indemnities is rising also at 6%, with generally in line with wages. And in 2024, we saw a moderate decrease in premium, both net written premium and direct written premium, resulting from continued strong increases in payroll, coupled with loss cost declines. And we see more than a decade of underwriting profits, calendar year and accident year. A strong reserve position with an estimated redundancy of $16 billion. And this position of strength gives us the confidence that the system can likely weather a storm that comes our way. And as you take in the highlights, all of the highlights that we captured here, the industry's investments in data over the last 2 decades are providing much of the insights that I've shared today, leveraging both the indemnity data and the medical data. And the work comp system is healthy today in large part because of the world-class data we have to respond to changes in the system. But I ask you to remember that our investments that we make today in data will lay the foundation for creating tomorrow's insights. And we're excited to introduce something new to you this year, the State of the Line at a Glance. It's a concise one-page summary that brings together the key metrics and insights in all in one place. And you can access it now right in the app. And as AIS attendees, you're the first to see it, so enjoy the early access. And during the break, Join me in the Meet the Experts area, which is right outside the ballroom. And I'll be there along with many other NCCI thought leaders, and we're looking forward to answering your questions, connecting with you, and continuing this conversation. So thank you for being here today, and most of all, thank you for your commitment to our industry.